Today I've got for you guys the definitive guide to the best Apex Legends settings on PC right now. I'm going to be covering in-game settings, config files, the NVIDIA control panel, and a little tip on how you guys can get 120 FOV in Apex. So let's start in-game in the gameplay settings. This video is going to be mostly based on video settings and the configs that are actually going to improve FPS and lower your input latency, but gameplay settings are important to improving the overall experience. So I'll cover through the key ones here that I would say are not preferential. Starting off with crosshair damage feedback, make sure that this is set to off. By having this on, you get that kind of normal hit marker effect that you get from a Call of Duty game or something like that. But in this game, it's not needed because we have damage numbers. When we shoot people, damage numbers come out of them. So by having this crosshair damage feedback or the hit marker on, it just adds visual noise when you're shooting people. It can actually make it harder to keep track of people at range. So keep this off. Damage numbers, put this to stacking. What this does is if, for example, you shot someone once and you did 20 damage, and then you shot them again and you did another 20 damage. By having the damage numbers stacking, you would see 40 above the head, 20 plus 20. And that way you can actually keep track of how much damage you've done to an enemy. Far better than having loads of 20s come up. You don't really know how much you've done. You could be very close to cracking a shield. It's not very useful having on anything apart from stacking. Weapon auto cycle on empty, I'd recommend keeping that off so that you keep control of when you're going to swap weapon. Incoming damage feedback, definitely keep that on 3D. It's the most useful of the three options in terms of when you get shot. It's quite easy to figure out where you're getting shot from, and therefore you can position effectively to get back into cover. And there's not really anything else in here apart from reticle, where I'd recommend that you come in here, customize it, and change it to a different color from the default. I'd recommend something like a bright green or a cyan color, so something like this. So yeah, either this or around here are both good colors to go with. They stand out far better than white crosshairs on a lot of areas on the map, so I'd recommend you come in here and change that. The last thing in here is colorblind mode. I would put this on Tritanopia at the moment because it does actually just brighten up the game and give the colors a bit more pop to them than the other settings, even if you're not colorblind. Okay, and now what you're all here for, video settings. Now, I'm going to leave a config file in the description below, which is your video config, and let me show you exactly what you can do with that. From that link below, copy all of the text for the video config. You're then going to come to your file directory, and you need to go to your C drive, users, your username, whatever it is, and then saved games. In here, you'll find a folder called Respawn, so we'll open that. Then the folder Apex, and then local. In here, you'll find your video config file. Hopefully, you'll be able to open it up in Notepad. If not, just open Notepad, just like that, and then just drag and drop this into there, and it will open it up. From in here, you just need to take everything that is in here, delete it, and replace it with what is in the link below. It should have the same layout to something like what I've got here. The only thing you then need to change in here is what your resolution is. And that is these two settings here. So setting.defaultRes and setting.defaultRes height. For me, I play on 1080p, so I've got a 1920 by 1080 here. Once you have all these settings set, you're going to do a file and then a save. For me, that's not going to work, and I'll show you why. I'll just close out of mine for now. I would then recommend that you right-click and then go to Properties on the video config, and you come in here and you select Read Only down here, and then click Apply. This will mean that you cannot change your settings in-game. If you want to change anything in-game in regards to video settings, you'll need to come back in here and uncheck Read Only. So I'm just going to give you a quick rundown of what's actually been done in the video settings. So these will all be set based on what was in that video config. You won't have to come in here and change anything. Once you've done that video config, you should end up with the same as what I've got here, except for the resolution maybe. There are also some things in that video config file that are not related to settings here. There are actually things going on in the background or setting things to values that you can't actually set in the game. So it's going a little bit further. But let's run down the list. Display mode full screen gives you the best input latency. It's not trying to render something in the background. It's exclusively just running the game and rendering it in. Aspect ratio, I keep this at 16:9. If you want to run a stretched res, you can run 16:10, but I prefer at the moment to run at a standard native 16:9 1080p. Brightness, 50% is fine. I haven't really found I need to play with the brightness on this game. FOV, this says 110, but as you'll see later in this video, I am actually running a 120 FOV, so stay tuned for that. FOV ability scaling, I have that disabled. I don't know why that's set to enabled. I it won't actually make any effect when we do the 120 FOV, because what happens, for example, when you use Octane's stim ability, is you go from the 110 FOV to 120, but because we're running 120 FOV, nothing actually happens anyway. So I just keep this disabled. Sprint view shake, definitely, it needs to be minimal because we don't want the screen shaking all over the place while we're running about. VSync disabled, it adds input latency. It should only be enabled if you're running a G-Sync setup, which I am not. NVIDIA Reflex enabled. You can also try out enabled plus boost. Honestly, the way that it works is that if you have a CPU-bound system where your CPU is a lot weaker than your GPU, enabled plus boost is meant to help out, but most people have found that enabled actually just gives better overall responsiveness and performance. So I'd recommend sticking with this and then maybe trying enabled plus boost and just seeing if there's anything obviously better about it. You likely won't find out anything is, so stick on enabled. Adaptive resolution we're not using. Anti-aliasing we keep off. It's definitely an FPS hog. There's only 2 options here, unfortunately. TSAA is not a performance-friendly setting, so definitely keep this to none. Texture streaming budget, this has been found to really not actually affect FPS much at all. If you're really going for max performance, you can turn this all the way on to very low, but it makes the game look horrible, and so this config actually sets it to high, keeps your game actually looking fairly crisp, and allows you to increase your visibility overall. Basically, everything from texture streaming down is just set to the lowest because it's not actually going to improve our visibility in any way. It's not going to improve our gameplay experience. All it's going to do is reduce visibility and reduce FPS. So we want to keep this all off or low. Next up, let's look at NVIDIA control panel. This is obviously going to be specifically if you have an NVIDIA graphics card. If you don't, you can skip this section, just go to the next section down below. But this is going to show you how you can set up the control panel to actually limit your FPS, because limiting your FPS is necessary for Apex. So come down here to show hidden icons, unless it's along the bottom. Right click the NVIDIA logo and go to NVIDIA control panel. Takes a little bit to boot up, but in here we'll be able to play around with all the settings that we need. So manage 3D settings, come to program settings, and then where it says select a program to customize, you can click the drop down menu and see if Apex appears here. If it doesn't, just go to add, and assuming you've been running Apex recently, Apex will be here because it'll be on the recently used. So we can click add selected program, and then I'll just make this full screen. You can see here the specific settings which I've changed for Apex. So anti-aliasing FXAA, turn this off. Anti-aliasing mode, turn this off. This just forces that we don't have any anti-aliasing happening, reducing our FPS. The game still looks very good with that anti-aliasing, actually. A lot of games I prefer to have anti-aliasing on because the jagged edges look kind of horrible. Honestly, the shimmering and jagged edges, really not that bad in this game. CUDA GPUs, set this to all. Low latency mode, set this to on. This is the equivalent of having it set to enabled rather than enabled plus boost. Max frame rate, very, very important one here. There's been a lot of tests done, and there's a weird bug in Apex where if you run the game over 190 FPS, you get these weird micro stutters, and this has been in the game forever, I think people have found. So whatever the FPS of your monitor, whatever the refresh rate of your monitor, come in here, turn this on, and we just want to be making sure we're having a max frame rate that is below 190. A lot of people settle on 180 as that value, so just set it here, set it to on, set it to 180. This is going to make the game run a whole lot smoother overall. OpenGL rendering GPU. Bit of a mouthful. Just set it to your graphics card. For me, it's my RTX 3070. Power management mode, prefer maximum performance. Preferred refresh rate, put this to the highest available. Texture filtering, anisotropic sample optimization on. Negative LOD bias, allow quality high performance, trilinear optimization on. Threaded optimization on. Threaded triple buffering off, and vertical sync off. This list of settings just makes it improves that overall responsiveness and that whole gameplay experience even further than just setting stuff up in your game. Once you've done all that, I haven't changed anything, but you'll see an apply button down here. Click that and it will lock it all in. Lastly, we're going to look at setting up an Autoexec file, which will be a file with a bunch of extra settings that will initialize when we boot the game. We're going to set up the 120 FOV that we were talking about, and we're going to set up our Steam launch settings to ensure that the Autoexec runs when the game starts. So firstly, you need to go back to that folder where we had the video config from earlier, then just go one level up, so back to the Apex folder, and then go into the profile folder where you'll have a profile config file. Open this up in Notepad, like I do here, and you'll see a bunch of numbers and settings. In here, we're only looking for one thing, and it's right near the top. It is this one, CL FOV scale. If you have your FOV in game set to 110, then your FOV scale here will be 1.55. In order to achieve the 120 FOV that we're looking for here, change this to 1.7, as I've done here. After that, you're going to click Save, and then you're going to close out, right-click the profile.cfg, and then put it to read-only, like we did for the video config. Remember, this profile config file contains everything in terms of basically all of our gameplay settings that we set earlier. That's why we went in there and we set those up first before coming in here, because if we now go back in game and try and change them, it isn't going to work because this is set to read-only, okay? That's why we do it in this order. Next, move over to the launcher where you've got the game installed. For me, it's Steam. I'm assuming a lot of you guys have moved over to Steam now. And then you can right-click Apex Legends on the left, go to Manage, and then go to Browse Local Files. Takes a second to open, but eventually we get this folder, the Apex Legends folder in the Steam area, or in the Origin area if you've got it installed through Origin. Next, go to the CFG folder. And in here, you will have everything which I've got here, apart from autoexec.cfg. So the simplest way that we can get a .cfg file that will allow us to open it is we're going to do this. This is how we're going to create the autoexec. Grab this config default PC, right click it, go to copy, and then right click elsewhere in here and go paste. What this will do is it will create a copied version of that CFG file. We're going to rename it to autoexec. I can't name it to autoexec because I've already got one, so I'll just name it autoexec2, but you need to set it to just autoexec, no space. Open up that new one that you've just created. It will be a copied version of what was previously the config default PC, and we don't want anything in here. We're going to take it all and we're going to delete it. There's another link in the description where you can grab the autoexec, which you can then copy into this file, and I'll show you what that looks like. So I'll go back, I won't save this. I'll delete this one. You'll have your autoexec config and it will be filled out like this. There's a bunch of different settings. A lot of the stuff in here doesn't actually do much anymore, but it's not going to cause any issues having it in there. These are all kind of bits of autoexec that have been gathered over the years that Apex has been out, and overall just improve the gameplay performance. So I would recommend copying them all in anyway. If you want to go and find out information on all of these, you can go do that, but I'm not going to explain them here. The key one in here is that at the top, we have the CL_FOV scale 1.7 again. And then below it, we have bind US standard F12 exec autoexec. Now we're going to do something in the Steam settings that makes it so that this autoexec automatically opens when you jump into the game. But if you change a setting in game, or you change your FOV in game and you lose the 120 FOV and you're not able to get back to it, you'll be able to press F12 and you'll be able to get back to 120 FOV. Right click Apex Legends on Steam and then go to properties, go to general, it's just right here, and then launch options. In here, you want this list of options. I'll leave them all down below. The only thing that you want to change is this refresh to whatever the refresh rate of your monitor is. I've got a 240 Hertz monitor, so I set mine to 240. If you had a 144, this would be 144. Simple. But yeah, it's 240 for me. FPS max 0. The reason we do this is because we've set our FPS limiter in NVIDIA control panel rather than trying to do it from here. So from in here, what this does is it actually tries to uncap the frame rate. So it will basically uncap the frame rate and then NVIDIA will cap it afterwards. And this is the best way to get good latency out of an FPS limiter. The last thing to really cover in here is the plus exec autoexec line. This is what's actually going to make the autoexec run when we start Apex. So with all of that dialed in, we're now back in the game in the firing range, and I'm going to show you the 120 FOV in action. We've actually got 120 FOV right now, and I'm going to show it to you. So if I come to settings and we go to video, and then what I'm going to do is I want to basically set this back to 110. It's showing as 110 here, but we're actually at 120. It just can't show it on the settings because you can't go above 120 here. So what I'm going to do to go back to 110 is I'm just going to lower it And then I'm going to increase it back to 110. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to close out. And you can see that if I position my camera here, we can only see the targets 2 on either side of the character. What I'm going to do is I'm going to press the F12 keybind that I set in that Autoexec file, and it should initialize the Autoexec again. When you first open the game, you don't need to do this. This is purely just in case you accidentally turn off the FOV that we want. So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to press F12, and you'll see the game expanded. And I've got that 120 FOV now. So this FOV matches the FOV you'd get when you're running around as Octane, usually in the game. And this keeps everything consistent if you're playing a legend like Octane, but it also just gives you so much more vision left and right than you usually get in Apex, making that overall gameplay experience just far more in line with a lot of other games that enable you to go up to these kind of FOVs. And that is everything I've got for you guys today. Hopefully you have found this informative. I know it's a very long list, but by following through all this stuff, you'll have had the chance to get Apex running at the best that it can run. It's an awesome game, but it's held back by a lot of technical issues that have plagued it since its release. And just following these settings mean you can nullify those pretty much down to nothing and leave you with a fun gameplay experience. So if you have enjoyed, make sure you smash that like button down below and subscribe for more videos from me coming very soon. I will see you guys in one of my next videos. Bye bye.